Hi guys, Kaiser here. Today I've got a fun tier list video for you. As you may know, the Age of Empires 3 Noob Cup 2 is approaching on the channel, where a host of players who have barely played on the ranked ladder, if at all, are going to compete against each other for the title of Noob Cup Champion. Signups are wrapping up on February 12th, and our first games are beginning in early March. So, as a side note, if you're interested in joining the Cup, maybe you've never played online before, or maybe you're around 700 ELO on the ladder, I have a link to the Iron Kaiser Gaming Discord server down below. The more the merrier. We'd love to have you join us to follow in on the action or even join the Cup yourself. It would be a great time. But anyway, players have already started practicing and plotting for the Cup. I've been talking with some of them, and there is this question out there: which civilizations should I focus on? Which civilizations are going to be the best for me to train on for the Noob Cup? Because each player needs to learn at least 3 civilizations to compete in a best of 3 series. And that's what today's video is all about. I'm going to be giving my personal ranking on which civilizations are the best for newer players to learn AoE3 on and pick up in an environment like this one. So just to be clear, I'm not talking about which civilizations are the best or the strongest, but which civilizations provide the best learning opportunities, the best handicaps, or otherwise just the best civs for noob players to grab a hold of to learn the game and to dominate in a Noob Cup world. Now, let me go ahead and get some things out of the way here. First off, I do want to say I am by no means a pro player myself, and so I'm always saying leave a like, leave a comment down below, but especially on this video, check out the comments on this video, because I have no doubt I'm going to have players better than me leaving comments on the video, sharing their own opinions, giving their own tier list. I'm fascinated to hear about what rankings you would give the different civs. So check that out in the comments below. And the other thing too, I'm not going to be talking a whole lot about home city cards and decks. I'm just looking at the overall profile of the civilizations. But with that, let's go ahead and dive in. And I'm going to start off talking about the European civs, and then I'll move down from there into the Native American civs, then the Asian civs, and then I think I'm doing the African civs and then the colonial civs after that. Or maybe vice versa, colonial and then African, I don't remember. But anyway, let's go and dive in. All right, we're going to start off with, in alphabetical order, so I'm starting off with the British, Great Britain. And looking at their strengths, I think they bring some very solid options to the table. They're a good all-around civ. You have to spotlight as their main feature the Manor House. The Manor House is the British unique version of the house. It costs a little bit more wood, yes, but it spawns an extra villager every time you build one. And that is incredible. It's a great bonus in the hands of pro players because you can get an incredible eco boom off of building manor houses, especially with certain cards that make them cheaper and that kind of thing. But in the hands of a newer player, I think this is an incredible bonus because if you're new to the game, you're probably making mistakes like letting your town center go idle. You're forgetting to produce more vills, you're forgetting to keep your eco booming, right? Keeping your eco developing. And I find that the British Manor House bonus provides a really nice band-aid to that kind of mistake. It's a skill you want to develop over time, but if you're new to the game, this is a really nice bonus and would be very helpful in a Noob Cup environment. You also have the Royal Guard upgrade available for Musketeers. They have the Redcoat Musketeer, which no other civilization gets access to. So in the Imperial Age, your British Musketeers have 10% more hit points and damage than equivalent upgraded Musketeers. So Musketeers are kind of a bread and butter unit, a very solid foundation civ, a solid foundation unit that you build an army off of. So I like that the British have that as a kind of a PowerPoint for them. On the negative side, the thing that jumps to my mind, they do not get access to the skirmisher in the barracks. You are locked into the longbowman unless you have certain cards in your deck that would unlock, I believe they're called the Rangers, Green Rangers or something like that. But without access to the Rangers, you just have the longbowman as your anti-infantry option. which they have their strengths too, but for my own taste, I prefer guns myself. So I like having skirmishers, and the fact that they're missing out on skirmishers is a weakness. But I think that weakness, insofar as it is a weakness, is nowhere near as weak as the strengths the British bring to the table. You have got to put them in S tier, in my opinion. This is a very strong civ to learn the game on. I would be surprised if we don't see a lot of the British in the Noob Cup. Next civilization we have are the Dutch. And by the way, before I get to the Dutch, I'm sorry, let me say real quick too. I like the Europeans as a whole for the Noob Cup environment because these are the oldest civilizations. These are kind of the foundational civs that the game is based off of, and then everything else is sort of spreading out from that foundation. And so when it comes to learning the fundamentals and learning the game, the sorts of bonuses that are better for newer players, I think that AoE3 tends to skew toward the European civs. So just a little bit of a spoiler alert, I think in my own tier list, the European civs will generally rank a little bit higher than the expansion civs, which I think are a little bit more complex. They bring a little bit more to the table and may make them harder for noobs. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the Dutch. So the Dutch, their big thing is they are able to produce banks. Banks are these buildings that provide a constant trickle of gold. And if you've seen my video on the Dutch, that it's an incredible bonus for those situations where maybe you're getting raided, and with any other civilization, you're having to garrison your villas in your TC, and your whole eco comes to a screeching halt while you're getting raided by your opponent. Well, not with the Dutch. With the Dutch, even if all your villas are no longer working, the banks are doing their job. And if they decide to attack the banks, well, they don't die nearly as quickly as a vill does. So that gives you time to prepare a response out of your barracks, or you levy your Minutemen, or whatever you do. Right, with the Dutch, your militia, town militia. Whatever you do, you have more time to respond. And so I really like the Dutch from that point of view. It gives you a little bit of sturdiness against raids. They also have a pretty easy to understand army composition. They lean very heavily into skirmishers and dragoons, which is one of the classic compositions in AoE3. So I like what the Dutch have there. Now, if I had to rank them negatively, could look at their cons, probably the big one is that their villagers cost gold. And I don't like that in a Noob Cup environment or in a learning the game environment, because that means that you have to learn a special way of playing the game as the Dutch that you cannot turn around and give to any other civilization. Let's say you learn how to play the Dutch really well. Well, you have to start over from scratch if you want to learn how to play the British or the French or the Russians, whatever, right? The Dutch require their own economic understanding, and it's weird. It's weird that vills cost gold, so you want to put a lot of vills onto gold, and then food becomes primarily for technologies and military units. And it's a fun civ to play, but very different. I do like the Dutch, so I'm going to go ahead and rate them highly, but I don't think they belong in the S tier because learning that eco is so important for them. It's very different. So I'll put them in the A tier. Next up, I've got the French. And to my understanding, the French are one of the best civilizations for this tier list. They are probably the S+ tier civ, if anything. Why? Well, for one, you have the Coureur de Bois, which is just a better villager, right? Just all around better. They do cost a little bit more, but they produce more resources, whatever they're working on. They're more resilient against attacks. They can hit back better than other civ units. So you just have a better villager in the French. And then they are, to my understanding, a good all-around civilization. They have good infantry. They have good cavalry. They're just good. If they have any negatives, it would be that, one, they are, to my understanding, a little bit weak to a rush. So if you're up against an opponent who's going to go all in early, yes, your Coureur de Bois are a little bit sturdier, but you're not going to necessarily repel an attack with just Coureur de Bois. So if you let yourself get hit early, which is true of any Civ, but the French in particular, their units cost a lot of resources, and they had that extra vulnerability in a sense. Maybe if there was another negative, it's that it's actually their strength. They're so flexible that the Civ doesn't point you in a particular direction. What I find sometimes with newer players is you're going to do a better job if you have a Civ that is encouraging you to go in a particular direction. On the French, they don't necessarily. You can do quite a few different strategies. But that's not going to keep them out of the S rank, in my opinion. I'm just making that shift right there because they are the S rank Civ, to my understanding. All right, next up I've got the Germans. Now, I am the Iron Kaiser, and when I started playing Age of Empires 3, the original version, way back many moons ago, I played the Germans virtually exclusively. I would play German Civs. And, I should, therefore, love the Germans, but in my experience, they are a difficult civilization to take advantage of. All right, their strengths, on the one hand, they start off with settler wagons. They are very strong eco units. They don't have the resiliency that the Coureurs de Bois do, but they're even better when it comes to gathering resources and building buildings. They're just a very efficient villager unit. And you can use more home city cars to get more settler wagons in. So they have a great economy if they're left alone. And also, whenever you ship a home city card, starting in the Second Age, you get free Uhlans, which are the German version of the Hussar. They don't have as much HP. They're more fragile, but they put out more damage. And so you have the ability to raid your opponent right out of the gate with Uhlans. And it's very tempting to just get out a couple Uhlans and go. Start fighting, start attacking right in Age 2. So they're a great rush Civ, and therefore they make natural enemies of the French, for the reason I just mentioned, right? So they're really good in that sense. But in my experience, they're also a little bit clunky in a couple of ways. If your opponent knows the Germans at all, they know that Uhlans are on the field. That's inevitable. And so you're likely, by the time, in my experience, you start raiding with Uhlans, they're going to have up either pikemen or musketeers, some sort of anti-cav response. And that means you either have to be very on top of your micro, moving your Uhlans around while you are also keeping your eco going at home, trying to put pressure on your opponent while, not going idle yourself, which is a very tall ask for a noob player, right? Of course, you may want to then build some sort of response of your own. How do you deal with these musketeer or these, pikemen? Well, you don't get access to the skirmisher until the Third Age. So your only option in Age 2 are crossbowmen. And, well, I say crossbowmen, or you could go Doppelsoldner. Doppelsoldner in the Second Age, but they're very expensive. And melee units, in my view, they're easy to kite, they're easy to bring down. It's hard to take advantage of on-foot infantry melee units that are not, shock infantry. They're just regular old, good old-fashioned swordsmen. They're easy to get shot down. And there are strategies that make Doppelsoldners work, but it can be tricky. So let me take them off the table. Then you've got crossbowmen. Well, again, you're putting resources into crossbowmen. That's slowing down your upgrade into the Third Age, right? And so then you hit the Third Age, and then you can start finally producing skirmishers. And at that point, I don't know, the Uhlans are... I just have never really made it work. If you get to the Third Age, you cannot do the Musketeer Uhlan combo because you don't get access to Musketeers as the Germans. You really have to go out of your way with some of the home city cards to unlock some native camps or some mercenaries to make that happen. Just with your base roster, you can do skirmishers, but you don't have access to the Dragoon. Instead, you have the War Wagon, which is a tanky unit, but a unit that does not have the mobility that the Dragoon does. So they have a very tough military, and some weaknesses where if you let your opponent... I've had opponents in the past just mass up Musketeer in Age 2 and hit me hard. and that's a tough situation to be in, right? So for the Germans, I'm going to go ahead and put them in the B tier here, which is the middle of the road. B's like, you're not really... I don't think the Germans really give you a lot that will help you as a noob. You do get the Uhlans, which are great. And if your opponent is not expecting Uhlan, then that's going to be fantastic. Then it's a fantastic noob choice. But assuming that they're going with anti-cav in response to that, it's tough. It is tough to sort of get into that third age. I think if you get into the third age, Skirmisher War Wagon is a strong choice. There are more options that open up to you as a German player. You can start getting artillery out and things, but based on what they give you, it's tough early game. Let's see. The Italians are next. This is a fairly new civilization, and actually is part of the Knights of the Mediterranean expansion, so I would be surprised to see a lot of Italy in the Noob Cup, because I think most of our players don't have these expansions. But I'm going to talk about them anyway. The Italians are a strong European civilization. They get access to the Architect, which is a really nice unit. The Architect will slowly but surely construct buildings for you for free, right? And you can spend some wood to rush construction of the building, but being able to just have this extra villager that does nothing but build buildings with no cost whatsoever is a fantastic eco bonus. Speaking of economy, you also get an additional villager with every technology you research. So you start off with a fairly weak economy. You start off with fewer villagers than normal, if I remember correctly, but that means that you do gather villagers very quickly as you research more and more techs. And so it encourages you to get up a marketplace quickly, get your eco-techs out quickly, and those sorts of habits are good for noob players to pick up. So I really like it for that reason as well. It's a nice combo of teaching you good habits and also sort of serving as a band-aid again for maybe letting your TC go idle or what have you. You get access to the Lombard as the Italians, which is, in the long run, better for your economy than the marketplace, because you can invest one kind of resource and get out the other two resources. Like, for example, if you put in food, you put in 100 food, you get out 50 wood and 50 gold. And so it's a good way to just sort of redistribute your economy in order to sort of balance things out. If you're a newer player and you're making mistakes in your eco, you're investing too much in wood and not enough in food or gold or whatever, the Basilica can really help with it. I'm sorry, the Lombard can really help with that. You also have access to the Basilica, which is better than the Church. It costs a little bit more, but it gives you more XP. It gives you 1 experience point per second instead of 0.7. And it gives you access to Papal units, which are elite units that you can mix into your army that can absorb damage and just make your Italian army much more resilient and stronger. So, some really good options for the Italians. On the flip side, looking at their light infantry options, you have the Pavisier, which is the Italian unique crossbowman. In order to get the most out of that unit, it requires extra micromanagement. You got to be willing and able to switch between different stances as the Pavisier. And for you Noob Cup contestants, you're going to want to learn how to switch stances, at least for your musketeers, because putting them into melee stance and making them fight melee against cavalry will make them much more effective. It's a little pro tip for you there. But the Pavisier, that's much more important to do with them in order to get the most out of their armors, right? So it requires extra micromanagement from them. Their skirmisher, the Bersaglieri, is not available until the 4th age. So that's a very hard unit to get into. And I also think that those Papal units, which are really great mixed into an army, can be a noob trap. You can look at those and think, oh, I need a whole chunk of them, and you grab up 5, 10, 20, whatever, when really all you might need are just a few mixed into a normal army. So you got to kind of watch out for that. You got to keep your Architect moving. So there's a certain amount of micromanagement, or just sort of you can't afford to lose sight of these various bonuses in order to make the most out of them. which I guess in a certain sense is true for every civ and every bonus, but particularly with the Italian bonuses, I think that's the case. But I'm going to put them in the A tier because I think the Architect is really strong, and I like getting those vills with every technology. Those are some great bonuses. Up next, I've got the Maltese, Malta. Take a look at these bonuses. We've got units gaining more HP with every shipment. We have the special unique Maltese barracks healing units over time. So if you get into a fight, you've got half health units. You pull them back to your barracks, and you let them sit there and wait, and eventually they're going to heal back up to full. That's pretty nice. Your Explorer is able to build both fixed gun emplacements and gunpowder depots, which can be used to very powerful effect. You have crossbows and culverins as the Royal Guard unit, so you get more out of your crossbowmen than other civilizations do. And culverins. Now that is an unsung hero in AoE3 because once you're at the 3rd age, everyone wants to get artillery out. The culverin is the anti-artillery unit, and having stronger, healthier culverins as the Maltese is a really nice bonus. I like that a lot. You have the special build in the commandery, where you can send units into the commandery and then pop them out on another commandery on the other side of the map. You can transport armies very quickly that way, and with the right use of home city cards, you can unlock a lot of additional strong units in your commandery as well. You have sentinels, which are the Maltese version of the musketeer. They can construct outposts and I believe forts too, if I'm not mistaken. And they get more HP and attack when they're around allied friendly buildings. You also have the Hospitaller, which is this swordsman unit that moves faster around allied buildings. And then finally, you've got certain, home city cards that I have to mention as the Maltese. Wignacourt Constructions, Vittoriosa, the German Tongue card. Quite a few cards that give Malta a very strong economy. So this is a great civilization for defensive play, for kind of sitting back, trying to withstand any early pressure and building up into a strong economy, a strong army, and then moving out in the 3rd age or the 4th age, the 5th age, and overwhelming your opponent with waves of strong units, right? I think the Maltese are very good. There are some weaknesses, though. Those musketeer replacements, the sentinels, they take 2 population space. So you've got to watch your pop count way more as the Maltese than any other civ. They almost have to be played defensively because the sentinels, they lose most of their bonuses if they get caught out in the open and they just sort of get overwhelmed without their extra HP bonus, right? Their extra attack bonus. I also think it's easy to misplay a lot of their bonuses. You can, like I just mentioned, lose the aura upgrades on the Sentinels or the Hospitallers, the knight units, the swordsman units. You can misplace buildings. It's easy to blow up your own units with the gunpowder depot. It's easy to sort of misplay the gun emplacements, right? It's easy to spend too much on the wrong kinds of units. So I think it takes a certain amount of finesse to play the Maltese correctly. And it also takes some skill to get the most out of commanderies, whether you're talking about making sure that you're using their transportation feature correctly, or whether you're looking at what units should I be spending cards on to get into my commandery, right? What units do I want to bring in? Things like, do I spend a card on the Portuguese Caçador or not? Or something else, maybe the Spanish Lancer, right? So you've got some weaknesses there too. I think it requires a certain amount of finesse. I do like the Maltese for players who are more defensively minded. And I think that's a lot of newer players. I think a lot of new players like to play defensively. A lot of newer players are worried about rushing and playing offense. And so for that reason, I'm going to rank the Maltese pretty highly on this list. I think they're good. I might give the Italians the edge over the Maltese, but I like what the Maltese have. All right. Next up, the Ottomans. The Ottomans. All right. The Ottomans, I think, are the ultimate handicap civ in a lot of ways for newer players because Ottoman town centers spawn the Ottoman unique villager, the Yoruk. They're spawned right out of the gate for free. So you don't have to remember to go back to your town center and produce more vills. You don't need to remember that at all. It'll do it automatically. And you're not even having to spend any resources. So your eco's a little bit slower because it takes longer to auto-produce villagers than it does to build them normally. But you're not spending any resources, so all that food you'd otherwise put into villagers, you can instead put into technologies, put into an early army. A lot of people love rushing janissaries and rushing, the Ottoman unique units. There's so many of them now. You can put those resources elsewhere and just let your town centers do their thing, right? You also get access to the artillery range starting in the Commerce Age, which is a really nice bonus, both because you have things like the Abus Gunner available in the Commerce Age, and the Grenadier, I believe, too, if I'm not mistaken. But that also means that as soon as you hit the next age, the Fortress Age, you already have that artillery range up. You can get out falconets, and the Ottomans have very good artillery options, especially if you get out the right home city cards. They have great artillery. So, some really, really strong options. It opens up a lot of things. You have the Azop, which is a really good anti-cavalry option if, for whatever reason, you're not spending, food and gold on your Janissary, which is also a very strong musketeer option. Right? So if you're not going, Janissaries, you can go with the Azop as a really nice pikeman replacement because the Azop has a ranged attack that does anti-cavalry damage. So they're pretty cool. And that's a nice combo. I like what the Ottomans bring to the table. Probably their main weakness is you have to remember, as soon as you're able, you need to get up a mosque and you need to get researched the various technologies that increase your villager limit and that make the auto-producing of villagers go faster. You need to prioritize both of those technologies and remember to keep doing that. And I think it's very easy because the Ottoman Civ takes away that requirement to constantly go back to your TC. Produce more vills, produce more vills. Because it takes that away, it's easy to sort of get lulled into completely forgetting your economy and forgetting to do that. And I would worry for my noob players that they're going to be stuck on 25 villagers and wondering where's my eco? Because they forgot to go to their mosque and pick up the improvements to villager limits. And there's several techs that you have to pick up over the course of the game. You got to remember that. Regardless, I think that they are a very strong choice for a Noob Cup tournament. I've got to put them at the very top. I don't know that they're as good as the British. I might give the British the edge. I don't know. That's neck and neck to me. I think these three belong in the S tier for a good reason. All right, let's see who we got next. Ah, yes, the Portuguese. The Portuguese. The Portuguese have some really nice options available to them. Probably the main one is whenever you go up to the next age, you are given another town center for free. Now, if any of you listening to this are Age of Empires 2 players, just hearing that should make you should. That's wild. The idea that you get free town centers every age up, starting in the second age. The potential to explode your economy is massive with the Portuguese. Just getting those free TCs. You have the Caçador, or the Caçadors, which are a unique replacement for the Skirmisher. They hit harder. They have more attack, although they do have less HP. So they're more fragile, but they do more damage. And they also have solid Dragoons. So they have a really nice lead into one of the most common AoE3 army compositions, the Skirm Goon combo, Skirmishers, Dragoons. They cover each other's back very well. So the Portuguese do that extremely well. They got the good TC. The Explorer has an extra ability. They have the Spyglass ability, which lets them, almost like a satellite, you just get a vision of a small part of the map for a few seconds for free. Which is, I think, a really... Okay, let's be honest. If you're like me, you use it once at the beginning of the game, and then you forget for the next 20 minutes, right? But It is a really good ability if you remember to use it, because it will let you scout in. If you know where he's setting up his army, you can scout in, see what he's doing without having to lose anything, and that gives you extra time to respond, right? So the Spyglass ability is nice. And then you have, again, I'm not talking about a lot of Home City cards, but you can't ignore Federias. Federias, I think, is an incredible card. It was recently nerfed, so it is not as meta-shakingly strong as it used to be. But even so, it means that all of your town centers are producing resources for free. You're already getting those TCs for free. Now they're producing resources. And because this is the Noob Cup, I would dare say that pressure on your base is not likely to be as consistent as it would in pro-level play, right? So I think you're going to get more out of the Federias card and your extra town centers than you otherwise would. Those TCs are great, not just for producing vills, but also for protecting them. If you need to move out across the map and claim other gold or other wood spots, other hunt spots, the Portuguese are great for this. Probably if there is a downside is it's easy to overboom on the ecos front. It's easy for that economic approach to be expected, and if your opponent does put on some significant pressure in the Second Age, which is much easier to do in Age of Empires 3 than it is in Age of Empires 2, you may not have the resources or the infrastructure down to respond to that. So you have to recognize as a Portuguese player that your opponent is probably expecting you to go all in eco. He's going to attack you, and you've got to have some kind of response ready. Just enough of a response to push them back, keep that eco going. So, I like them. I think they're a very strong choice. I don't think that they're as good as our top civs, but I would put them highly into the A tier. Probably, if I were breaking my A tier down, I'd say maybe at the very top of the A tier. I like the Portuguese a lot. The next civ, Russia. The Russians are interesting. All right, their main feature, units are cheaper. And that includes their settlers. Their economy is cheaper. Now, that comes with a twist. For the Russians, you have to train their villagers and their infantry in blocks of units. So instead of spending 100 food for one villager, you have to spend 260 food, if I remember correctly, for 3 villagers. So you're saving more over time, but it does mean, to dip into the cons a little bit, it means their eco can be a little bit clunky. You've got to make sure you have enough resources to buy a batch of units in one go. Whether you're talking about settlers or you're talking about infantry, you are not in a situation where you can start, let's say you want to train some musketeer, right? With any other civ, you can start the countdown with 1 musketeer, and as that musketeer is training, you can add into the queue up to 5 musketeer, and then they all pop out at once, right? When that first musketeer is trained, 5 come out. You can't do that with the Russians. You have to have those resources available to you right out of the gate. So that's a little bit tricky, but the units are cheaper. Blockhouses are the Russian unique version of the barracks. They're a barracks that also have a ranged attack. So that's really nice. You have the Oprichnik, which is a unique stable unit that is very good at raiding and destroying buildings. I understand it as kind of the AoE3 version of the... I'm trying to remember the name, not the Kipchak, but in Age of Empires 2, the Tarkin is the Hun unique unit. It's a cavalry unit that's very good at destroying buildings and sort of a siege option out of your stable. Right? Well, the Russians have that, and it's a very strong option, I think, if you want to try to end the game with some cavalry siege attack. Oprichnik is very good at that. Raiding, killing villagers, destroying buildings. Very, very good for that. On the negative side, I've already mentioned the eco is a little bit clunky. The army relies on mass. I think up until the final age of the game, the Russian military is weaker man-to-man versus others. I believe it's 20% less HP and attack for a Russian musketeer versus a generic musketeer, right? So they're weaker, and you rely on numbers. And particularly in a Noob Cup environment, I think that's very dangerous, because what I see from a lot of newer players in AoE2, in AoE3, in strategy games in general, is there's this temptation to reach a certain number of units and just stop and say, okay, I've got enough. You know, I got a handful, that's all I need. My handful of guys can go out and win and beat their handful, and that's it. And you have to learn over time the habit to build more. And that's what the Russians rely on. You have to have that instinct to build more and more and more. So I'm a little bit worried on that front. Strelets in particular can be deceptively weak. They absolutely rely on numbers. You cannot stop at what feels like a good amount. You gotta have more. Greed is the name of the game for Russia. So for me, I'm gonna put them with the Germans, I think, in the C tier. The Russians, I'm sorry, in the B tier. Kind of in the middle ground. I don't think that they really give you a lot that makes them very good for newer players. The little bit that they do give you, like, again, the cheaper units, I think is offset by what Russia demands of you. So I'm not going to put them any lower than B, but I'm not going to put them any higher than B either. I think middle of the road is good for the Russians. Next up, we have the Spanish. Probably their main shtick. They have faster shipments. So if I remember right, they earn experience points faster, and their actual shipments travel faster to your home city. So you get a lot more out of your deck as the Spanish, and it's more important to develop the Spanish in that way than others. The Explorer also has the ability to produce war dogs, which I think is useful in a world where you're being attacked and you haven't yet got up a barracks. As long as your Explorer's around, you can train something to fight off enemy infantry. And I think it's great to have that option in your back pocket. You have a very strong cavalry unit in the Lancer, which is kind of a Hussar alternative that does bonus damage against infantry. So they can actually go, to my understanding, they can go mano-a-mano against Musketeer and win that fight. Especially if you mix in the Spanish missionaries, which are the replacement for the priests. They, of course, can heal units, and with the Unction card, can actually give them an attack bonus as well. So there's some pretty cool options that the Spanish have. But I think you can really surprise people with the Lancers. Your opponent goes Musketeer thinking that they'll counter cavalry, which they do most of the time. But Lancers can come in and really surprise an opponent with just how effective they are, especially if you tech into them and you pick up your technologies, your home city cards, you focus in on Lancers. That's a really good option. On the negative side, one, their barracks, particularly the Rodolero, is very hard to use. I think it's maybe a little bit of a trap unit. If you are not dealing with a cavalry raid, if you're not being raided by Hussar, I would say probably skip Rodoleros. I had a video on my channel where I talked about the Rodolero Rush, but really, that was an older Age of Empires strategy that I think is very difficult to pull off nowadays. And there are much safer, easier options for the Spanish, so don't fall into the trap of using the Rodolero. In general, I don't think that there's anything too negative about the Spanish, but I don't know that the faster shipments are the be-all, end-all. I think Unction is a really cool card, and mixing in missionaries in order to give your military that religious fervor bonus that lets them attack. I forget if they attack harder or faster or if they have more HP. They're just better, right? That's really cool, but it also requires a little bit of extra micro awareness that you want to have in the back of your mind, right? So they have some cool things, but I don't know that it's particularly strong. Most players, I think to get the most out of the Spanish, you're looking at the faster shipments and you're trying to time particular power spikes and get in damage at just the right moment. You send a card at just the right time to overwhelm your opponent or to get out that big win. And if we're talking about newer players, I don't expect that level of finesse. So for me, the Spanish don't really add anything. B tier. And then finally, our last European civilization, we've got the Swedes. Now, the Swedes have access to the Torp. It's their Swedish unique version of the house. And what the Torp does is it actually gathers resources automatically around the building. So when you build a Torp, it spawns a berry bush right beside it, so it starts collecting some food. And then if you build it next to a gold mine, it's going to start collecting coin for you. If you build it next to some trees, it's going to start collecting wood. And it can collect from any one of those resources all at the same time, or any one of each. So if you place it right, you can throw a Torp down and collect from wood and coin and food all at once. And then maybe you can get some hunt near the Torp and shoot the deer down next to the Torp, and now it's collecting from deer too. It's great, right? It's a very powerful option if you're able to take advantage of it. You have access to the Carolean, which is a very strong musketeer-like unit. They have access to their unique charge ability, which gives them... They're locked into melee, but they get a bunch of extra movement speed. So you can rush in on an opponent very quickly and surprise or overwhelm an enemy line with your fast-moving Carolean. So that's a really nice option. Like the Ottomans, you get access to the Siege Workshop in the Commerce Age, where you have access to the Leather Cannon, which is an artillery unit, kind of a mini falconet. It's not the best against buildings, but it does a very good job against infantry. So it's kind of your skirmisher replacement. Now that's a nice segue into our negatives for the Swedes. They don't get access to the skirmisher. You have to take advantage of mercenaries. The Jäger in the tavern is available for a lot of coin. You can go down the mercenary route, but if you're just talking about your base roster, you don't have access to the skirmisher, right? You have to rely on the leather cannons. They can be expensive, especially if you're staying in the Second Age, right? So that's something to be aware of. I also think in a noob environment, Torps can be tricky because they require a lot of mental bandwidth in order to get the most out of them, to plan out where you're going to put your Torps, where you're going to get the most out of them. You want to put at least one down on every gold mine, right? And you want to try to find that golden Torp spot, which is great. You can make two mistakes though. One, you can ignore the bunch. You just throw the Torp down like a regular house, and then they're not really doing a lot for you other than the berry bushes, right? But the other mistake you can make is you get so focused in on this little mini game that the Torps provide that sometimes what you got to do is ignore it. Sometimes you just need to put down a house so you get some pop space out and you can get your army out and going. And I think there's a temptation to fixate on the Torp, and that can be a mistake that newer players can make. I mean, I know I've made that mistake, so I'm sure that some of our Noob Cup players would make that mistake if they play Swedes. So I like them. I do like the Torps. I think that they give a strong bonus. I like having access to the arsenal in the Second Age. They also have, I didn't even mention the Hakkapellet, which is a very nice Dragoon option with very strong melee. So there's a good choice. You've got a good Musketeer, a good Dragoon. Now you'll notice, again, the two meta combos for AoE3 are either Musketeer and Hussar, or Skirmisher and Dragoon. It's a little bit weird for the Swedes. You either have to go Carolean and Hakkapellet, which is sort of a mismatch, right? They both are weak to Skirmishers. Or you could go Hussar, Carolean. Or you could go Hakkapellet and, again, maybe something like Jäger, or you have some native camp skirmisher option, right? But either way, I like what they've got. I really enjoy the Torp option. I think they're a solid choice, and I think the Torps are enough to push us up to the A tier. I think they're a little bit better. They give a little bit more than the Germans, the Russians, and the Spanish, but maybe not as much as the Portuguese. Or this is kind of like an A minus, right? If the Portuguese are A plus, the Dutch kind of in that A category. Swedes are A minus. Yeah. All right. Now those are the European civs. Next up, you know what? I have next on my list the colonial civs, but I'm going to actually skip them. Let me scroll down here and go to the Native American civs. So we're talking the Aztec, the Inca, the Haudenosaunee, and the Lakota. Okay. And looking at those civs in general, first, Native American Civs, I think one of their great strengths is they can actually recruit human treasure guardians with the explorer. And if you're smart and patient with that, you can get a small army going of just treasure guardians. You know, you play as the Aztec on a certain map, and before you know it, you've got 3 gunslingers and 2 plague doctors and, you know, a rogue musketeer or whatever. And you have a small army without having invested anything, which you could use to attack, or you could use as kind of a defensive force, just to help you repel, you know, an early musketeer rush or something like that, right? So I think that's a really nice bonus for the Native American Civs. I also love that you can build the war hut in Age 1. The European Civs have to wait till Age 2 to even put down a barracks. For the Native American Civs, you can put the war hut down in Age 1. That is your barracks. And like the Russians, the war hut has a ranged attack, so you can use it defensively to protect your villagers. But then that also means once Age 2 hits, you can immediately start getting out infantry. You don't need to wait to build that building. So there's some momentum that's built into these civilizations. I think is really nice. The Explorer is also stronger than the European Explorer because each one has a unique aura that makes units around the Explorer stronger in some way or other. And I think that's really useful because we want to take advantage of the Explorer. We want to figure out how can we do something with the Explorer. And with the European Explorer, it can be a little bit difficult to take advantage of them in later ages. I know I, for one, at this point, I don't know how to take advantage of an Explorer in the late game. I mean, yeah, you can snipe a military unit with the crack shot skill or whatever it's called. And you can research, I think it's called Knighthood, that gives your Explorer a strong melee attack, but really all the Explorer is good for is to serve as sort of a tank, to soak up some early damage, you know, for your army while they lay into the enemy, right? That's what jumps to my mind. So I think it's hard to use the Explorer as a European Civ. With the Native American Civ, you put your Explorer into your army, and they're buffing all of your army in some way, which is really nice. On the other hand, the big negative for me is that they take advantage of what's called the Community Plaza, which is a building where you can put villagers or priests into, healers into, and you get some sort of buff for your civilization. And you can go into the Community Plaza and change what that buff is. You might switch from military production buildings produce faster over to we need to make our explorers HP stronger. And then now we need to switch over to what am I thinking of? We need to levy up military units in response to whatever's going on. Right? That's actually, you don't have access to Minutemen as the Native American Civs. You have to use the Community Plaza to train them up. And you train faster based on how many villas you have in the Community Plaza. Right? That, I think, is difficult. And particularly, again, for newer players, how do you take advantage of the Community Plaza? How many villagers should I put in the Community Plaza early on versus later on? Should I focus in on healers and maybe focus healers early in order to get them working in the Community Plaza while I keep my villagers doing eco things? Or do I want to focus on something else? Is there another bonus early game versus late game? I think it just gets tricky. And I think it's very difficult to understand how to use the Community Plaza correctly. Also, I think in general, the Native American units can be confusing, figuring out how they're supposed to work, especially the different kinds of shock infantry. A lot of the Native American Civs don't get access to cavalry, especially, I want to say, the Aztec and the Inca don't. So figuring out, their alternatives can be difficult. For the Aztec player, the positive side of that coin is it can also be very difficult for your opponent to realize how you're supposed to respond to that. So you might be able to surprise your enemy by going Aztec. But they're very confusing all around. And also, I think it can be a little bit tricky to navigate the various big button techs that are available in each of the different buildings. So you click on your marketplace, and you've got a big button tech. And you click on your tribal marketplace, and you got a big button tech. You click on your house, and you've got a big button tech. and each one does different things, and just remembering to hop around to all the different buildings and pick up all these different texts as they become useful, that can be tricky. So I think there's a level of micromanagement that is difficult. All right, let's start talking specifics, and we'll start off with the Aztecs. One thing you gotta love is they have Eagle Scouts trained by the explorers. This is kind of like the Spanish. I love having the explorer have this ability to train units by himself, so if you get caught on the back foot, you don't have any buildings up or your barracks got raised, and now he's attacking your TC. And you've got a TC slowly whittling away at this army, but, you know, all else being considered, you're going to lose your home center. Well, now you can train up some units with the explorer, your Aztec leader, and that's really nice. I think that really does help out a lot. They're not the strongest units, but in a pinch, they'll do the job. You also have access to the Arrow Knight in the Noble's Hut, which is really great because the Noble Hut basically is sort of, I don't want to call it your stable, but it's your tier 2 military building, and the fact that you don't have to build a second, or I should say a third building, you don't need to build an artillery foundry in order to get out the Aztec version of artillery is really nice. You can build these 2 buildings, they're responsible for your various infantry and quote-unquote cavalry options, right? And then you already have baked into the cake your siege option. Is really nice. That's pretty cool. So I like that. I find the Aztec, of all of the Native American civs, I find the Aztec roster particularly confusing and taking the most time to sort of figure out how they work. What are the different shock infantry options, and how do they, relate to the larger AoE3 game? I find them very tricky in that respect. I don't think that the Aztec are particularly any better or worse than any other Native American civ. Just because of the complexity that goes into a Native American civ generally, I'm going to put them in the C tier. And that's basically where I'm going to go with any of the Native American civs, unless they give me something stronger for a newer player. Then that's where they're going to go, as the C tier. Okay. Next up, we have Haudenosaunee, the former Iroquois, if I remember right. Haudenosaunee, they start off, the Explorer aura gives extra HP. So, of all of the different bonuses, I think the Aztec gives movement speed, if I'm not mistaken. But the Haudenosaunee, their Explorer gives extra HP to the army. I love that bonus. I think that's the best bonus of all of the Explorer aura bonuses, so I really like that option. You also start the game with a Travois, which is a unit that you can choose. You can basically throw down a free building for free right out of the gate. You start the game, you decide, I want a house. I don't want to have to worry about getting up enough wood and sending a villager over to build it. I just want to pick this Travois and get my house right away. Or maybe you want to go for a marketplace or whatever. You can do that immediately at game start. That's a really nice bonus. I like that. And then your house, the longhouse, actually supports 15 population instead of the normal 10. So that's really nice. I like those bonuses. And I think that their army composition is a little bit easier to kind of get a hold of compared to the Aztec. But on the flip side, one thing that I think is going to be very tricky is that for the Haudenosaunee, as well as for the Lakota, villagers are not allowed to mine gold like any of the Civ. You have to build a particular building called the Tribal Marketplace. You build that building next to the gold mine, and then the villagers that you assign, you can assign up to 10 villas to the marketplace, and they stand around and essentially they mine the gold mine through the Tribal Marketplace. And it's just an extra step that makes the Haudenosaunee eco a little bit more convoluted. And I think in a noob environment, that can be confusing because you're no longer able to just say, grab bills, click on a mine. Instead, you got to remember, grab bills, pick this building, and I promise you're going to take seconds thinking, what building is this again? What's the icon? Oh, yeah, it's this one. As you click that, you throw it down, and then when that gold finally expires, you say, okay, well, now what do I do? You got to remember to go grab them again. It's a small thing, but I think it just adds up. I don't like this weakness of the Haudenosaunee. as far as their eco goes. I think that's just a little bit tricky. I think I'm debating putting them in B tier, the Haudenosaunee. I just don't know. I mean, you got a little bit more pop with your house. You've got a nice bonus on your Explorer, but is that really enough? And I don't think it is. I'm going to keep them in C tier, although I do think that they're better than the Aztec for a newer player. They're a better choice, but I don't think that they're quite good enough. So far, if you're going to pick a Civ to learn the game on, or if you're picking a Native American Civ for the Noob Cup, I would advise the Haudenosaunee so far. But let's keep going. Next up, we have the Inca. The Inca have some cool bonuses. I really like what the Inca have. One, you've got this thing called the Tambo. The Tambo is the Incan alternative to the trade post. And what it does, it's a trade post that also allows you to garrison villagers in the trade post, in the Tambo. And it starts off with an attack. Other civilizations can give their trade posts an attack bonus with a home city shipment. But the Inca get it right out of the gate. And if you garrison villagers in the Tambo, it does even more damage. So it can be a very effective defense against early raids, right? So Tambo, pretty neat. It gives you a little bit more freedom, defensive flexibility to explore the map, send your villagers out and gather resources and be able to be safer than other villagers would in that environment. So Tambo's pretty neat. You have the Kamcha house, which is the Inca version of the house. It not only produces pop space for you, but it also slowly generates food. Now that's not going to be your entire food eco, but it's a nice little bonus that adds to your food production, right? That's pretty neat. And I believe it also, the Kamcha house does give you more population than normal, if I remember right. I don't remember off the top of my head how much, but I believe it is more than just 10. Also, you can garrison your army inside your strongholds. The stronghold is the Incan version of the fort, or in AoE2 we call it a castle. And the Inca were introduced to Age of Empires 3 as kind of an AoE2 wink and a nod. And some of the ways that the game plays, you can build strongholds, which you can garrison army into. You cannot do that with your generic European forts. So you can hide your army in that way, keep them safe, let the stronghold weaken the enemy, and then pop back out when it's safe or when you're ready to attack. And then you also have access to the Priestess, which lets you convert units. So that sounds pretty great. On the negative side, as cool as it is to get conversions off and convert enemy units to your side, right? I don't know, to my understanding of the game, which again, I want to approach this with some humility. I'm not a pro player. Others could speak with more authority than I can. But based on my perspective, I don't think that being able to convert a single unit in AoE3 is as impactful as it is in either AoE2 or in AoE4. I know in Age of Empires 4, you can use a relic and you can convert a whole group of units in one powerful converting move. Or in Age of Empires 2, the game often plays out where knights in the early Castle Age are so strong that one conversion can completely change the game. You know, one or two really well-timed conversions can completely throw off an enemy's attack and give you the win. I don't know that Age of Empires 3 works the same way, where you are likely to attack your opponent or be attacked by your opponent with a single knight. A single hussar is destroying your entire army, and you get off that one conversion that changes the game. I don't think that really happens, at least in my game, so very often. So I don't know how useful that is. The Tambo is cool, but it could also perhaps push you in a negative direction, where maybe you think you're safer than you actually are, and that leads your eco to getting blown up when the Tambo does fall apart. You know, I don't know. I don't know that the Inca bring that much to the game. It doesn't help, too. Now, again, I'm not talking about what civs are the strongest or the weakest in general. I'm more or less ignoring the meta. But a lot of people will say that the Inca are the weakest civilization in the game right now, period. I don't know how important that's going to be in the Noob Cup, because so many of the players just aren't even aware of the various intricacies of the different civs. But that's one more thing that I think is, for me, going to keep them in the C tier instead of bumping them up into like a B-, right? And then we have our last civilization here, the Lakota. And the Lakota have some really cool bonuses. One that you have to love, especially as a noob. They start the game with full population cap. You do not need to build houses at all. Right out of the gate, you have a full 200 pop cap. And what you can do is you can build TPs that, instead of raising your population cap, they provide an HP boost for units around the TP, which is a great sort of a defensive option unless you claim territory. As long as you're fighting around a TP, your units are going to be stronger, healthier than they otherwise would. That's a really nice bonus. I really like it. They also have very strong cavalry options. Their negatives, again, they have to build the tribal marketplace, which I don't like. I don't like that. And maybe if you know that the Lakota have very strong cavalry, and your opponent knows that they have very strong cavalry, it may be a kind of weakness where it's so expected that you can kind of counter yourself by making the obvious choice, and then you get blown up by an anti-cav option. But I just can't ignore just how good it is to start the game without ever having to worry about population cap. As a noob player, that is amazing. That is just one thing you never have to think about. It does teach you bad habits in the long run, but if you're in the Noob Cup and you're trying to win this tournament, that's a really, really solid bonus. And so for me, I'm putting the Lakota in the B tier, making them, in my view, the strongest of the Native American civs for this sort of environment. For being a newer player trying to learn the game, a newer player trying to win a Noob Cup, I like the Lakota. All right, next up, let's do the Asian civilizations. That's the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Indians. Let me just sort of say as a preface before looking at them. The Asians are they bring a complex set of tools to the game. They introduce a new resource, which is export or influence. I think it's influence for the African civilizations and export for the Asians, but it's the same kind of thing where it's an additional resource that you can trade in order to receive different units or bonuses from civilizations you're allied to. Okay, so it's a pretty cool bonus, but a little bit of a tricky one. And another thing, let me go ahead and get my music back up here. Another bonus that is, again, a good thing, but can be tricky, is that the Asians have to build wonders to age up. They don't research technologies or politicians in their town centers like other civilizations do. They have to build a wonder, and that's both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because these wonders give you a lot more than politicians typically do. A politician might give you 400 wood, 500 food, woo! Well, an Asian wonder will give you a permanent bonus. It might be a super fort with, extra strong attack and the ability to train up all manner of units. Or it might give you a permanent trickle of resources, or it might make villagers work so much faster around that building, right? So, strong bonuses. But the flip side of that coin is, if you're attacked while you're building the wonder, and you have to garrison all your villagers inside the town center in order to stay alive, you're not making any progress on teching up, which other civs are, right? And then, even if you do build the wonder, if for whatever reason that wonder ever goes down, it's not coming back up. You can't rebuild it, right? So, there's a strength there, but also a vulnerability, two vulnerabilities at least, that you have to be aware of as an Asian civilization. Now, and one other thing to be aware of is that farms... I didn't mention the export. I talked about the export, but it's an extra resource that can be very useful, but it's also very... how do I want to put it? It can be difficult or confusing to remember to use the export, to factor that into your strategy. When's the best time to use the export versus not, right? At best, I think for a lot of new players, what you do is just put that in the back of your mind. Just play the game like normal, and then when you remember, hey, I've got all this export stocked up, then you can turn around and go to your, consulate and spend it all to, get a bunch of additional, units or whatever. But trying to factor in how am I going to use export in the middle of your game, that can be tricky. One other thing that I think is overall a negative is that for the Asian civilizations, their farms are smaller. With the European and the Native American civs, you throw down a farm and you can put 10 villagers on the farm and you're done. So in the late game, if it becomes a slog like that, then you can throw down 3 or 4 farms and you just take your 30, 40 vills and put them on the farms and you're good. Well, with an Asian civ, every farm only holds 3 villagers. So you have to build so many more farms in order to kind of keep food production going or coin production going. So there's just an extra level of micromanagement that's required with your eco. That's tricky. Now, looking at the individual civs, the Chinese, one bonus that's really nice, their houses support 20 population out of the gate. And you can research technologies that give them even more pop limit. So that's pretty cool. Explorers, much like with the Spanish and the Aztec, the Chinese explorer is also able to train disciples, which are pretty cool. And not only that, but when an explorer wins a fight against an enemy unit, there is a chance that he will automatically spawn a disciple. So that's pretty cool. And again, provides you a certain amount of military flexibility, either to claim some early treasures or so that you have some kind of military response if you're attacked early, right? On the other hand, this is huge for me, the Chinese barracks is unique. The Chinese military buildings are unique in that you are not allowed to train individual units. As the Chinese, you can't say, hey, I need crossbowmen, I need spearmen, and just queue up spearmen or crossbowmen. You have to pick banner armies, which you train them up and they give you a mix of different units. So you pick a banner army, kind of like the Russians. You buy a bulk of units and it's going to give you 3 spearmen and 2 crossbowmen, or it'll give you 2 crossbowmen and 2 swordsmen, or whatever, right? It mixes and matches the different Chinese roster units. And that can be fine if you really take the time to learn the Chinese and you know how to play the Civ. In a Noob Cup environment, learning the game or trying to win as a noob against other noobs, for me, the Chinese are first civilization to go at the very bottom of the list. I recommend not playing the Chinese, which, I say as an addendum. I should have said this at the beginning of the video. Any civilization that catches your eye, I encourage you to play. That's important. If you like the sound of a Civ, you like the aesthetics, you like the idea of a Civ, go for it. But, if you're just asking yourself the question, I don't care, I just want to find the Civ that will help me learn the game the best or that will help me win the best or whatever, I think the Chinese are at the bottom of the list. Don't go for the Chinese. I think that you have to put in a lot of work in order to understand the Chinese and make them good and unique among the various Asian Civs. Well, among the various Civs in general. Next up, we have the Japanese. Now, the Japanese are pretty cool. They start the game with 2 cherry orchards, which Japanese villagers can farm and collect food from. Villagers for the Japanese are not allowed to hunt, but that's actually not so much of a problem because you have the cherry orchards right at the start of the game, and you can put those cherry orchards very close to your town center. And that means that your villagers are staying safe under the town center, and they're not hunting deer out in the distance, and they are, running the risk of, getting getting surprised and sniped by enemy Hussar. That's not happening. They're able to stay safe for quite a while into the town center thanks to the cherry orchards. And then they have a unique house called the Shrine, which either villagers can build or your explorer can build. And that's another great bonus, just that by itself. Your explorer can build your houses. Which is great because that means more villager time focused on collecting resources while your explorer helps to actually build your civilization, right? But the Shrine doesn't just do that. The Shrine is also a mini factory. It slowly generates resources for you, especially if you build that Shrine near wildlife. So you build it near deer, the deer come and they live near the Shrine, and that improves how much or how many resources your Shrine is developing. So it's a really, really nice bonus, the Cherry Orchard. That combo, Cherry Orchards and Shrines. And even though it's a little bit trickier to know that your villagers don't hunt, and that's something different than it is with other civs, I don't think it's that big a deal. One other thing that's a really nice bonus, it's easy to forget, but it's a nice one, is that your explorers have access to the smoke screen power, like a ninja. They throw down smoke, and that lets your explorer automatically teleport back to the town center. That's really cool. So if you find yourself sending an explorer too deep into enemy territory, you made a tactical mistake, which noobs do, and you're going to lose your explorer, no way. You just throw down that smoke screen, and you're right back at your town center. Or maybe your explorers are out exploring, and you're suddenly being attacked at your base, and you need that explorer there to help fight off the attack. Throw it on the smoke screen, they're there. That's a really nice bonus. If there's such a thing as a negative for the Japanese, at least the one that jumps to my mind, not being super familiar with Japanese, but probably the main difference is that the Japanese are one of the civilizations that get access to 2 explorers, which means that they're weaker than a single explorer would be. So it takes a little bit more to optimize the explorer. But for me, that's not much of a negative. I'm putting the Japanese in the A tier. I think they're a very good civ to learn the game on. I really, really, really love the Cherry Orchard and how that keeps your villagers safe. As long as you build it near the town center, your villagers are going to be safe for a long time, and that gives you a little bit of peace of mind to navigate the early game in a way that other civilizations can't. Finally, we have the Indians. The Indian civilization. Positives? They've got a great flexible army. They have a very strong flexible army. They've got musketeers in the... I hope I don't get this backwards. Their musketeer equivalent is the Gurkha, and the sharpshooter or the skirmisher alternative is the Sepoy. I may have that backwards, but either way, they've got a full barracks set of options. They have a great stable line. They have a very strong stable line, including the Zamburak, if I remember correctly, is the gunpowder camel unit's really good. You also have access to a siege elephant out of your stable, which is really nice. So kind of like with the Russians, you can start producing building-destroying units. You know, units that specialize in destroying buildings out of a stable, and you don't need that artillery range in order to bring down buildings. Which again, in AoE2, a large enough massive infantry or cavalry will do the job anyway, but it is important, or it's useful to have siege options, and to have that out of your stable is really nice. So the Indians are pretty flexible. On the flip side, you do have the 2 explorers thing, like with the Japanese. You have 2 explorers instead of 1, so it's a little bit harder to optimize them, because I don't believe, if I understand the meta right, or the balance right, one-on-one an Indian explorer is as good as, you know, a regular explorer. But here's the really big problem. Villagers cost wood instead of food, and villagers are not allowed to use cattle at all. Any cattle that you collect will slowly generate experience for you, which is great, and in the long run, that's a really good thing. But learning the Indian economy, where you have to put vills on wood in order to spend for more vills, it's kind of like the Dutch situation. You have to learn a very unique economy for the Indians, and unlike with the Dutch, you don't have the banks that are those buildings that give you, gold, churning away, kind of like mini factories, working away in the background right out of the gate. You don't have that with the Indians. So you have to learn a very unique economy in order to make them work. I don't like it. I think that it would be very easy for new players to mess up, whether that's, I know I, for one, have tried to put villas on food before and realized my mistake only when it was too late. Or you just have to learn a whole new way of playing the game for the Indians. I don't like it. For me, I'm putting them in the C tier. The C tier being, again, like, I would recommend not playing them. I won't say they're the worst of the worst, but if B is neutral, C is kind of a -1, right? Yeah, that seems good to me. I think they're kind of the C- of the group here. All right. Next up, we've only got 4 left. Let's look at the African civilizations and then the colonial civilizations. So we have 2 African civs. And just looking at the African civilizations generally. On the one hand, one thing that's really cool, their cattle, any cows you collect or train, generate influence. Again, the African version of export for the Asians. They generate influence. You can also take your cattle and sell them for wood or gold, which you can't do with any other civilization. So that's a really great way to get a quick infusion of food or coin. That's really great. You can levy their version, and they have multiple versions of Minutemen. You can levy units from houses instead of the town center. So there's a little bit more flexibility there. And those levied units cost influence instead of the regular resources. So if you are, trying to bank up your normal resources with any other civ, if you're playing the Dutch or the British or whatever, and you're forced to levy Minutemen, well, that's going to cost you food and coin, and it's going to slow down whatever else you want to do. Well, as the African civs, if you consider influence kind of a bonus side resource to use when you've got the time and you're just going to focus in on food and wood and gold, well, then that means that those resources are freed up elsewhere and you can levy units more easily, right? Of course, if your strategy relies on influence, maybe that's a different question, but moving along. You also get access to the war camp as the Africans, which provides your infantry and your cavalry in one building, which is a really nice bonus. It's great that you don't have to worry about mixing and matching different units. That gives you a certain flexibility to your army that other civilizations might be pretty envious of. On the negative side, and this is probably the thing when I look at the Ethiopians and the Hausa, your tech up choices provide a lot of flexibility, but they are very complex. There are way too many options. When you tech up as either the Ethiopians or the Hausa, you're given you're given an immediate bonus, and you're given a new home city shipment, and you're given a new tech that you can research in your university, and you're trying to figure out as a newer player, well, you got 5 different options, and which home city card do you want, and which university tech do you want, and you're trying to understand what each option brings to the table, and it is so much more complex than with a European civ where you're just choosing between 500 food and 400 wood and maybe an extra villa and a couple of cows. There's so much more on the table. That's great for the civ in kind of a general sense, but as a noob player fighting in the Noob Cup, boy, there's too much. I think there's too much, and it makes these African civs very, very, very difficult to learn. I also think it's very easy to mess up when working with the cattle. I know my own experience, what I've played around with the African civilizations, there's a temptation to sell your cattle very quickly, and that means that you're not generating the influence that you should be generating. But on the flip side of the coin, I also think you're probably making a mistake if you never sell cattle. And so you got to find the right kind of balance to navigate the cattle market, right? I also believe that the African fields are like the Asian fields as well, where you have to build more of them in order to get the same amount of food or gold generation as the Native Americans or the colonial or the European civs. So that's one of the things that I think is a negative for them. Now, the two civs, I'll just go through these quickly. I think they have some pretty unique things. The Ethiopians, they have a really cool Hussar unit in the Oromo Warrior. It's basically a Hussar that also has a really strong musket shot. So he fires off one really good musket shot and then goes in for the melee attack. I just love the idea of that unit. That's really great. You have the Sebastopol Mortar, which is a super heavy artillery piece that will blow up any kind of land unit, infantry, cavalry. If they get shot, they're going down. But they're really expensive. You know, they're weak to culverin. If cavalry get on the mortars, they'll go down fast. So they have some really cool options. And the Ethiopians also get the Mountain Monastery, which will slowly, you can build the monastery on a gold deposit, and it will slowly gather coin from the gold mine. So that's pretty neat. And it also generates influence as well. So there's some unique options. And for the Hausa, they're also pretty great. They've got the university, which I like even more because the university gives you a permanent supply of influence, whereas the Mountain Monastery, if I'm remembering correctly, by default, it stops producing influence once you run out of gold. Well, the university constantly produces influence, and you get to play a fun minigame where if you put the university next to a town center and a trade post and a castle, then it generates even more influence. So you can kind of, if you navigate your town buildings correctly, you can get a lot of additional influence out of it. So that's pretty neat. And you get access to the griots, which are musicians that increase building work rate and unit movement speed. So that's pretty great. They've got some fun bonuses. But for me, as cool as those things are, they do not make up for just how complex and convoluted the leveling up of those civs are. If you decide to play these civs in the Noob Cup, you have to spend a lot of time really doing a lot of research to figure out how should these civilizations play. And for me, no, I don't like it. Both African civilizations, not because they're weak again, but because you have to put in so much time to figure out how they uniquely play, and that time that you spend learning the Ethiopians and the Hausa isn't going to help you with any of the other civs. So for that reason, I'm putting them in the D tier. Stay away. And that leaves us with our final two civilizations, the colonial civs, the United States and Mexico. And let's talk about Mexico first, because they are first in the alphabet. And let me pull up my notes here for Mexico. They got some really cool things. I do like how starting in the Commerce Age, you get access to the Padre, which is basically a hero healer unit. He can go around, he can heal units, he can build the cathedral, which is the Mexican version of the church. He can build the cathedral instead of spending worker time doing that. And the cathedral's a really cool building because it gives you, just like the Italian basilica, the cathedral gives you more experience. It actually gives you 2 experience points per second, so double the basilica. But it doesn't give you any papal units or anything like that. So it's just, it gives you that extra experience, and it gives you some additional technologies that are pretty great. You got the Soldado, which is a good all-around musketeer type unit. If I remember right, it's slower training, but otherwise the Soldado is just better than the musketeer. You got the Insurgente, which only costs food and is a good anti-cavalry option, especially sort of a last minute, like, wait a minute, I'm being raided, what do I do? If you've got nothing but food, you can throw down Insurgentes, and they can help you. So, I like the Mexican roster. The Mexicans are a very fun civilization to play. Here's the problem with the big negative for the Mexicans is they are the wildcard civilization. There are so many options that the Mexicans can take because their unique feature is they can revolt over and over and over again. You can go, I think you have to tech up the second age, but once you hit the second age, you can revolt into either, I'm forgetting. I think it's Guadalupe or it's Baja Mexico, I think are the 2 options. And one is a very eco-focused revolution. Another is a very all-in military revolution option. You can revolt in one of these 2 paths or just stay with Mexico. And if you choose to revolt, then you can revolt back into Mexico in the 4th Age, and you go straight to the 4th Age. Or you stage Mexico into the 3rd Age, and then you have other revolution options in the 3rd Age. Or you go to the 4th Age and get more. There's just so many revolution options. There's so many options as Mexico that it's mind-boggling. It's overwhelming. There are some very cool strategies you can pull off as Mexico. They are a lot of fun. But if you've noticed, what puts a civilization in the D tier in my list is a civ where you're having to spend so much time learning that one civilization, and you sort of fall apart with... It doesn't give you anything for any of the other civs. To me, Mexico falls in that list. Where learning Mexico, you're only learning Mexico. And so I'm going to go ahead and put them in the D tier. I think you should stay away. You can learn some strategies with Mexico. They're very fun civ. You could try an all-in Baja Mexico push. That's an option. But I do think that they're too risky, and it takes too much investment into the one civilization. Finally, that leaves us with my home country, the United States of America. And the US are in kind of a similar boat. The United States gets access to the Minutemen, which is a stronger version of the town militia. It only loses its health down to 60%, otherwise it keeps it. And you can call on the Minutemen over and over and over again. So there are actually some strategies that rely on you building up an army of Minutemen, and certain cards and technologies that make them stronger and turn them into Marines. And there's some pretty cool options you can do with the Minutemen. But the point is, with other civilizations, typically, you can only call on the town militia once, and that's it. With the United States, you can call on Minutemen over and over again. You also have an extremely strong option in the United States Gatling cannon. If you get into the late game and you mass up a whole bunch of Gatling cannons, they're hard to beat. If your opponent does not have a massive culverin, you're probably winning that fight. Just in general, if the United States gets into the late game, they are very, very strong. So they've got a very strong eco, into a very strong military, and they're just strong. They are a strong civilization. On the other hand, the flip side of the coin, they are weaker in the early game. They're vulnerable to a rush. And a thing that's really big for me, thinking again in a noob sort of mindset, the states mechanic can be very confusing. The way that the United States work is when you take up to the next age, you pick between one of 5 United States states. And each state that you pick will give you a certain immediate bonus, as well as unlock 2 new home city cards in your deck. And so if you decide to play the United States, you've got to take time to figure out what are each of these states, not just what immediate options they provide, but what home city shipments do they provide, which one fits best for whatever strategy I'm going for, because some are going to be better than others in different situations. That can be confusing. That can be tricky. And again, you're doing all that while also trying to quickly go up the ages because you're not as strong. Oh, and the other thing too is the United States infantry requires quite a bit of micro. Just looking, for example, at the skirmisher options, you either have the state militia or the sharpshooter. The state militia is the U.S. version of the crossbowman. And they are faster. They move faster than other infantry units, but they have, again, short range. So if you let an opponent get onto you, if Hussars show up and they snare you, they get that melee hit and they slow down your infantry, then you just lose all of your state militia. They fall apart. So you got to be very careful with your state militia. They die very easily. You can use them effectively for hit and run tactics, but that does require kind of a keen mind and a quick hand, and you just have to be on top of things. Or, again, you have the sharpshooter, which is a skirmisher with additional range. So they're very good at that. But again, of course, just like a skirmisher in general, if you allow the enemy to get onto you, they will fall apart very quickly. If I'm not mistaken, they actually have less HP than a normal skirmisher. I may be wrong about that, but They rely on range instead of movement speed, but the concept is similar. It requires careful micro of your units. So that's important, and the state mechanics is confusing. The United States requires a lot out of you. Now, I hope that this is not home bias, but I do think that the United States are not as complex as the 4 civilizations we see here in the D tier. So I am going to go ahead and put them in the C tier, and I might even put them above the Indians if I were, and I don't think this is the perfect arrangement of, best to worst within each tier, but I think that they are C tier worthy. I don't think they're quite as difficult as the Chinese, the Ethiopians, the Hausa, or the Mexicans, but I do think that if you're going to look at the United States, they do require more of you than the other civs, and therefore, if you're just learning the civs and you've got a month before you've played in the tournament, maybe don't go with the US and instead focus in on these other civs up here. But guys, that's my tier list. That's what I think. These guys are what I think are the top civilizations for newer players to learn how to play Age of Empires 3, or if you found yourself in a best of 3 battle against a fellow newer player and you're trying to just win games, I think that out of the gate, out of the box, the easiest civs to get wins on are the French, the British, and the Ottomans. And then below that, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Italians, the Maltese, the Swedes, and the Japanese are really good options. That's my list. I encourage you, read the comments below, leave a comment below, share with me what you think. Where do you agree and disagree with my analysis? I would love to hear more about it. Let me know your thoughts. And again, be ready to check out the Noob Cup. Games are going to start in early March, and I'm hoping that videos will start hitting the channel around mid-March. You got to give me time to cast it and actually upload the videos. But I'm expecting to have a great tournament. If you want to check it out, you want to join in, take a look at the description below for the Iron Kaiser Gaming Discord channel. Guys, that's all I got for you now. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. This is the Iron Kaiser, signing off.